been driving trucks for about 5 years now, and I've seen some weird stuff on the road, but nothing comes close to what happened to me last month. I'm still trying to make sense of it. It was a cold, rainy night in late October. I was hauling a load from Chicago to Denver, taking I-80 west. Around 2 a.m., I was somewhere in western Nebraska. The highway was empty, and I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. The rain was coming down hard, and visibility was poor. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught something on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer or something, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a man, standing there in the pouring rain, thumb out. Now, I don't usually pick up hitchhikers. It's against company policy, and honestly, it's just not safe these days. But something about this guy made me pull over. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe I was just lonely after hours of driving in silence. Whatever the reason, I found myself slowing down and pulling onto the shoulder. The guy jogged up to the passenger side, and I leaned over to unlock the door. He climbed in, soaking wet and shivering. "Thanks, man," he said, his teeth chattering. "I thought I was going to be out there all night." I got a good look at him as he settled into the seat. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. He was wearing jeans and a thin jacket that was definitely not warm enough for the weather. "No problem," I said, pulling back onto the highway. "Where you headed?" "West," he said vaguely. "As far as you can take me." We drove in silence for a while. I tried to make small talk, but the guy wasn't very talkative. He just stared out the window, watching the rain. After about an hour, I started to feel uneasy. Something about this whole situation felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on why. That's when things got weird. I glanced over at the passenger seat, and for a split second, I swear the guy wasn't there. It was like he flickered out of existence for just a moment. I blinked hard, thinking I must be more tired than I realized. When I looked again, he was back, still staring out the window. My heart was racing now. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself I was just seeing things. But then it happened again. This time, when I looked over, the seat was empty for a good 5 seconds before the guy reappeared. I was freaking out at this point, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I wanted to say something, to ask what the hell was going on, but I was too scared to open my mouth. Suddenly, the guy turned to look at me. His eyes were completely black, no whites at all. He opened his mouth to speak, and I saw rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "You should have kept driving," he said in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the wet road. I closed my eyes tight, bracing for impact, certain we were going to crash. But nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, the truck was stopped safely on the shoulder, and the passenger seat was empty. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely put the truck in park. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Was it all a dream? Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? As the sun started to come up, I finally worked up the courage to look at the passenger seat again. That's when I saw it. Carved into the dashboard in jagged letters, "Next time, don't stop." I quit my job the next day. I couldn't bring myself to get back in that truck, or any truck for that matter. I still don't know what happened that night, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never pick up another hitchhiker as long as I live. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I think I see him, standing on the side of the road, thumb out. But I keep driving. I always keep driving. I've been driving trucks for about 3 years now, and I've got to say, the open road can be a pretty lonely place sometimes. But what happened to me last week? Man, I don't even know how to explain it. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It was a Tuesday night, around 11 p.m. I was hauling a load of electronics from Salt Lake City to Boise. The route takes you through some pretty desolate stretches of highway in southern Idaho. We're talking miles and miles of nothing but sagebrush and darkness. I'd been driving for about 4 hours straight, and I was starting to feel the fatigue setting in. The radio was playing some old country tunes, and I was singing along to keep myself awake. That's when I first noticed something was off with my truck. It started as a slight vibration in the steering wheel. At first, I thought it was just the road, maybe some uneven pavement or something. But then the vibration got stronger, and I started hearing a weird rattling noise coming from the engine. I knew I had to pull over and check it out. The problem was, I was in the middle of nowhere. The last town I'd passed was at least 50 miles behind me, and I had no idea how far it was to the next one. But I didn't have much choice. I eased the truck onto the shoulder and cut the engine. As soon as I stepped out of the cab, I was hit by how quiet it was. No cars, no wind, nothing. Just dead silence. I grabbed my flashlight and popped the hood. But I'll be honest, I don't know much about engines beyond the basics. I was just hoping it would be something obvious that I could fix quickly. No such luck. Everything looked normal to me, but the truck still wouldn't start when I tried to turn it over. I was starting to get worried. It was cold out, my phone had no signal, and I was miles from anywhere. I was seriously considering just bedding down in the cab for the night when I saw headlights in the distance. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, someone who might be able to help. I stepped out onto the shoulder and waved my arms, hoping they'd stop. The car slowed down as it approached. It was an old pickup truck, looked like it was from the 70s or something. The driver pulled up behind my rig and cut the engine. That's when things started to get weird. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and thin, wearing old-fashioned clothes, like really old-fashioned. I'm talking suspenders and a newsboy cap. In the dim light from my flashlight, his face looked off somehow. Pale and gaunt with deep-set eyes. "Having some trouble?" he asked. His voice was low and gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in a long time. I explained the situation, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. There was something about this guy that was seriously creeping me out, but I needed help, so I tried to ignore it. He nodded and walked over to my truck without saying a word. He opened the hood and started poking around, muttering to himself. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it didn't sound like English. After a few minutes, he straightened up and turned to me. "Try it now," he said. I climbed back into the cab and turned the key. To my amazement, the engine roared to life, purring like it was brand new. I couldn't believe it. I jumped out to thank the guy, but when I looked around, he was gone. His truck was still there, parked behind mine, but there was no sign of the man. I called out, thinking maybe he'd walked off to take a leak or something. No answer. I walked over to his truck, thinking maybe he was inside. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The truck was covered in a thick layer of dust. Not just a little dirt from the road, but the kind of dust that builds up after years of sitting untouched. I reached out and touched the hood. It was ice cold, like it hadn't been running in years. I got back in my truck and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I drove straight through to Boise without stopping, my hands shaking on the wheel the whole way. I've tried to rationalize it since then. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw. And every time I drive that stretch of highway now, I keep an eye out for that old pickup truck. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, just to prove to myself that I'm not crazy. But a bigger part of me hopes I never do. One thing's for sure though, I'll never look at roadside assistance the same way again. Alright, so I've been driving trucks for about 6 years now, and I've seen some weird stuff on the road. But what happened to me last month? Man, it still gives me chills just thinking about it. I was doing a long-haul run from Phoenix to Seattle, taking I-5 north. It was late, probably around 2 a.m. when I hit Northern California. The road was pretty much empty, just me and the occasional car passing by. Now, there's this old way station just north of Redding that's been closed for years. Most of us truckers know about it. It's kind of become this urban legend thing. People talk about hearing weird noises when they drive by, seeing strange lights, that kind of stuff. I always thought it was just guys trying to freak out the newbies, you know? Anyway, I was coming up on this way station, and I started feeling kind of uneasy. It was probably just all those stories getting to me, but something felt off. As I got closer, I noticed the lights were on in the office building. That was weird because, like I said, this place had been abandoned for years. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better look. That's when my CB radio started acting up. It was just static at first, but then I swear I heard a voice coming through. It was all garbled, but it sounded like someone was saying, "Help, please, stop." Now, I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghosts or anything, but that freaked me out. I was about to speed up and get the hell out of there when I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. There was a guy standing in the middle of the way station lot, just standing there, staring at my truck. He was wearing what looked like an old uniform, the kind they used to wear at these stations back in the day. I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled into the station. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I thought the guy needed help. As soon as I stopped, I regretted it. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, and it was dead quiet. No insects, no wind, nothing. I rolled down my window and called out to the guy, "Hey, you okay?" No response. He just kept staring at me. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. I could see right through him. Like I could see the trees behind him as if he wasn't even there. I blinked hard, thinking I must be more tired than I realized. When I looked again, he was gone. Just vanished into thin air. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I was about to put the truck in gear and get out of there when I heard a knock on my passenger side door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a face pressed against the window. It was the same guy, but up close. He looked wrong. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes sunken and dark, and he was smiling. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide and unnatural, like his face was going to split in half. He knocked again, harder this time. The whole truck shook, then he spoke, and his voice, man, I'll never forget it. It was like a dozen voices all talking at once, some high, some low, all saying, "Let me in, I need to check your weight." I didn't even think. I just slammed the truck into gear and floored it. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, still smiling that horrible smile, watching me drive away. I drove straight through to Seattle without stopping, my hands shaking on the wheel the whole way. When I finally got there, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were handprints on my passenger side window. Handprints that looked like they'd been burned into the glass. I quit my job the next day. Couldn't bring myself to get back in that truck. I've been trying to rationalize it ever since. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination from too many hours on the road. But deep down, I know what I saw. And I know one thing for sure, I'm never driving that stretch of I-5 again. Not for all the money in the world. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I swear I can hear that voice again. "Let me in. I need to check your weight." And every time, it sounds a little closer. So I've been driving trucks for about 4 years now, and I've seen my fair share of weird stuff on the road. But what happened to me last week? Man, I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm not even sure I should be writing this, but I need to get it off my chest. I was doing a run from Dallas to Atlanta, taking I-20 east. It was a pretty normal trip, nothing out of the ordinary. I'd been driving for about 6 hours when I hit eastern Louisiana. It was getting late, probably around 11 p.m., and the traffic had thinned out to almost nothing. That's when things started getting weird. I was coming up on this stretch of highway, maybe about 10 miles long, that cuts through some dense forest. As I got closer, I noticed there were a lot of skid marks on the road, like way more than you'd usually see. It was odd, but I didn't think much of it at first. Then I saw the crosses, dozens of them, lining both sides of the road. You know those little memorial crosses people put up where someone died in an accident? There were so many of them, it was like driving through a graveyard. I started feeling uneasy. Something about this place felt off. The air seemed heavier somehow, and the silence was deafening. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Just dead silence. As I drove deeper into this stretch, I noticed something else. There were dark stains on the road. At first I thought it was just oil or something, but as I got closer, I realized they were reddish brown, like old blood. My hands were sweating on the wheel now. I wanted to speed up and get out of there, but something made me slow down instead. That's when I saw the car. It was an old sedan, probably from the 90s, pulled over on the shoulder. The hazard lights were blinking. I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, hunched over the wheel. Now, normally I wouldn't stop. It's not safe, especially at night. But something about this felt wrong. Like, really wrong. I pulled over about 50 yards behind them and got out of my truck. "Hey," I called out, "you okay?" No response. I walked closer, my flashlight beam bouncing off the car's rear window. That's when I noticed the back windshield was shattered. There was a huge hole in it, like something had smashed through from the inside. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I approached the driver's side window, shining my light inside. The car was empty, but the steering wheel and dashboard were covered in blood. Fresh blood. It was dripping down onto the floor mats. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. What the hell happened here? Where was the driver? That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound coming from the woods beside the road. It wasn't an animal. It sounded almost human, but not quite. I ran back to my truck so fast I nearly tripped. As I was climbing into the cab, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Something was coming out of the woods. Something big. I didn't stick around to see what it was. I fired up the engine and got the hell out of there. Pedal to the metal. As I was speeding away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The car with the hazard lights was gone, like it had never been there at all. I drove straight through to Atlanta without stopping, my hands shaking on the wheel the whole way. When I finally got there, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a handprint on the side of my trailer. A bloody handprint. I've been trying to make sense of it ever since. I looked up that stretch of highway online, and what I found chilled me to the bone. Apparently, that 10-mile stretch has one of the highest accident rates in the country. Way higher than it should be, statistically speaking. And most of the accidents are fatal. But here's the really freaky part. According to the articles I read, most of the bodies are never found. They just disappear. I don't know what's going on there, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never driving that road again. And if you're ever on I-20 in eastern Louisiana, and you come across a stretch of highway lined with crosses, don't slow down. Don't stop. Just keep driving and don't look back. Because whatever's there, it's hungry, and it's waiting for its next victim. Okay, so I've been driving trucks for about 5 years now, and I've seen some weird stuff on the road. But what happened to me last month at this rest stop? Man, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was a Tuesday night around 1 a.m. I was hauling a load from Chicago to Denver, taking I-80 west. I'd been driving for about 8 hours straight and was starting to feel the need for a bathroom break and some coffee. I saw a sign for a rest area coming up in 2 miles. Perfect timing, I thought. As I pulled off the highway, I noticed the place looked pretty deserted. There was only one other truck in the lot and no cars at all. Not too unusual for that time of night, though. The rest stop itself looked normal enough. You know, the standard setup with vending machines, bathrooms, and some picnic tables. But as soon as I stepped out of my truck, something felt off. The air was weirdly still, and it was dead quiet. No crickets, no distant highway noise, nothing. I shrugged it off and headed for the bathrooms. As I got closer, I noticed the lights inside were flickering. Great, I thought. Probably some crappy fluorescent bulbs on their last legs. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The flickering was even worse in there, casting weird shadows on the walls. And it was cold, like way colder than it should have been for a summer night. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the creepy vibe. As I was washing my hands, I glanced up at the mirror and nearly jumped out of my skin. For a split second, I swear I saw someone standing behind me. But when I spun around, there was nobody there. My heart was racing now. I told myself I was just tired, seeing things that weren't there. I splashed some water on my face and took a deep breath. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper right next to my ear. "Help me." I whirled around again, but the bathroom was still empty. I was seriously freaking out now. I decided to get the hell out of there and forget about the coffee. As I was speed walking to the door, I heard another whisper. This time, it sounded like a kid. "Please don't leave us." I froze, my hand on the door handle. Against my better judgment, I turned around slowly. What I saw then, man, I still have nightmares about it. There were people in the bathroom now. like a lot of people, men, women, kids, but they weren't normal. They were kind of transparent. I could see the bathroom stalls through them. They all looked sad, and many of them had injuries. One guy had a nasty gash on his forehead. A woman was cradling a baby, but both of them were soaking wet. A teenage boy had tire marks across his chest. I realized with horror that these were people who had died in accidents, probably on the highway nearby. One of them, an older man with a trucker cap, stepped forward. "We're stuck here," he said, his voice echoing weirdly. "We can't move on. We need help." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at them, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Suddenly, they all started moving towards me, their hands reaching out. "Help us," they chanted. "Stay with us." I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember running to my truck. The next thing I knew, I was back on the highway, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove straight through to Denver without stopping, downing energy drinks to stay awake. When I finally got there, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a handprint on my driver's side window, a small handprint, like a child's, and it was on the inside of the glass. I quit my job the next day, couldn't bring myself to get back in that truck. I've been trying to rationalize it ever since. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination from too many hours on the road. But deep down I know what I saw. And I know one thing for sure, I'm never stopping at a rest area at night again. Not for all the money in the world. Sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can hear those whispers again. "Help us. Stay with us." And every time, they sound a little closer. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see a rest stop that looks a little too quiet, a little too empty, just keep driving. Trust me, whatever you need, it can wait until the next town. Because some places, man, some places aren't meant for the living.
We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.